Have you ever imagined that your partner's parents could turn out to be the most dangerous enemies in your life? I fell in love with a Chinese woman believing love could conquer everything. But for 2 years, her parents secretly plotted against me, from cruel insults to petty dirty tricks to schemes meant to destroy my entire future. What they never knew was that every word, every act I heard, I remembered, and I was preparing for the day I would return it all. This is a story of endurance, deception, and a reversal so shocking it left an entire community stunned. Chapter 1: The First Meeting and My Secret. When I first met Lynn's parents, Lynn, my girlfriend at the time, now my wife, they had no idea about one thing: I was fluent in Chinese. In fact, Lynn herself didn't know. I had kept it hidden for 2 whole years. I'd studied Chinese back in college, partly as a challenge to myself, partly out of a love for the language. Never in my life did I imagine that this skill would one day become the most powerful weapon I'd ever hold. That day, Lynn brought me home to meet her parents. I remember it so clearly. I had planned to surprise them with a toast in Chinese, a perfect way to impress them, or at least that's what I thought. But just a few seconds after walking through the front door, that entire plan fell apart. As soon as Lynn's mother laid eyes on me, she gasped and blurted out in Chinese, "Oh my God, he really is black, isn't he?" Then she turned to her husband and immediately after asked Lynn point blank, "Why would you do this?" All of it in Chinese while still keeping a fake, polite smile on her face as though nothing had happened. I stood there listening to every word, yet pretending not to understand. In that exact moment, I knew I wasn't going to reveal my secret. If they already looked down on me like that, then I wanted to know the full truth of what they said when they thought I couldn't understand. Throughout that dinner, I was bombarded with cruel insults. They told Lynn she should break up with me because black men are always unfaithful. They said I was unworthy of their daughter, that marrying me would be a step backward in life. I just nodded, smiled, and thanked them for their warm hospitality. All the while, every single one of their words burned into my memory. From that day forward, I decided I would keep my secret hidden. No one would ever know that I had heard and understood every single thing they said. But instead of fear or weakness, something else rose inside me, a fire. They thought they could insult me while I stayed oblivious. They were wrong. And I swore one day this very secret would become their worst nightmare. Chapter 2: The Insults and the First Schemes. After that nightmarish first dinner, I started to realize one thing to Lynn's parents. Every single meeting was nothing more than a trial by fire. There was never a single occasion where I could sit down and enjoy a normal meal without overhearing them whispering and plotting in Chinese. And I, quiet, composed, sat there silently committing every word and every glance to memory. They didn't even bother to hide their contempt. At family gatherings, I heard them openly discuss how Lynn should find a proper Chinese husband, or whisper to relatives that this guy is just using her. They threw out crude remarks about my skin color, as if I were some kind of disgrace. I remember one particular incident at a cousin's wedding. We were taking family photos. Lynn's mother deliberately positioned herself next to me and then pressed the sharp heel of her shoe down hard on my foot. I kept smiling, showing no reaction while she leaned over and whispered in Chinese to her sister, "Watch this, black men are always hot-tempered. If I do this, he'll lose it, and Lynn will finally see his true colors." Instead of snapping, I held my smile even as pain shot through my foot. I knew exactly what they were trying to do. The moment I lost my temper, they'd have the excuse they needed to prove themselves right. And I swore I would never give them that satisfaction. From the very beginning, they tried every possible way to drive Lynn away from me. I overheard them saying I had no future, that my career would never go anywhere. They planted seeds of fear in Lynn's mind, that I would cheat, that I would ruin her life. But the thing that filled me with both anger and bitter amusement was this. They said all of it right in front of me, so sure that I couldn't understand a single word. In their eyes, I was just some polite fool, smiling even while being insulted. But in my mind, piece by piece, the blueprint of revenge was already beginning to take shape. I didn't know when the time would come, but I knew one thing for certain. One day, they would have to face the very words they had spoken, and there would be no escape, no denial. Chapter 3: The Escalation of Petty Cruelty. The more time passed, the clearer it became. Lynn's parents weren't content with just poisonous words. They started to escalate, testing me with petty, underhanded tricks, as if this was some kind of chess match where their ultimate goal was to erase me completely from their daughter's life. One evening after dinner at their house, Lynn's mother volunteered to wash the dishes. I went into the living room, and Lynn had stepped into the bathroom. My phone, however, was still sitting on the kitchen counter. When I returned a few minutes later, I found it foaming with soap, soaking wet in a sink full of water. She giggled, putting on her best oops, what a mistake face in English, but then just under her breath, I heard her whisper in Chinese to her husband, without his phone, he's useless. A guy like him needs to be reminded of his place. I stayed silent. I dried off my phone, eventually bought a new one, and filed the moment away in memory. Then came the summer barbecue. Lynn's father handed me a bottle of imported beer, grinning as he said it was to celebrate his new promotion. I raised it politely, thanking him. But before I even took a sip, I heard him murmur in Chinese. I slipped sleeping pills in there. Just 20 minutes, and he'll be out cold. Then Lynn will see his true nature. I pretended to take a swallow, let the liquid touch my lips, and when I turned around, I spat it out behind the house. I don't know what exactly they planned to do once I was unconscious. And to be honest, I didn't want to find out. But in that moment, I understood something crystal clear. These two didn't just hate me, they were willing to use any means necessary to sabotage me. Every move they made felt like a test, run a rehearsal for something bigger. And deep down, I knew it was only a matter of time before they crossed a line, before they did something truly cruel, something unforgivable. And I had to be ready when that moment came. Chapter 4: The Scalding Soup Attack. I had thought their petty cruelty couldn't possibly get any worse. But I was wrong. Lynn's parents took one more step, one so vicious that even now, remembering it makes me shiver. It was Lynn's grandmother's birthday. The whole family had gathered, and I was helping to carry food out to the table. I was holding a large pot of steaming, fragrant soup when I heard Lynn's father whisper softly to his wife. In Chinese, this pot is really hot. Immediately, like it had been rehearsed, Lynn's mother deliberately bumped into me. The pot tipped and scalding soup poured down my back, searing into my skin. The pain was so excruciating that I could only scream before collapsing to the floor, feeling my shirt practically melting into me. My whole body trembled as if I were on fire. And then came the part that shocked me more than the pain itself. Lynn's mother instantly threw her hands over her face, wailing and sobbing, apologizing over and over, performing like a professional actress. But I knew the truth. Every bit of it had been staged. They called an ambulance, and I was rushed to the hospital. But the nightmare didn't end there. 4 days later, when I had just returned home with my back still wrapped in bandages, an envelope arrived. I opened it and almost couldn't believe my eyes. The hospital bill. Lynn's mother had sent it straight to us with a handwritten note in the margin, "You pay for your own mess." In that moment, two feelings hit me at once: the suffocating agony of my injuries and a fire of rage unlike anything I'd ever felt before. I had stayed silent, endured, swallowed my pride, all to keep the peace for Lynn's sake. But clearly, every inch of patience I had shown had only emboldened them further. I realized then that this so-called battle had crossed every possible line. And if they were willing to use violence to test me, then I would be just as willing to use my silence and my secret to bide my time and prepare for the day I finally flipped the board on them. Chapter 5: They Wanted to Destroy My Future. If the scalding soup incident hadn't already shown me just how cruel they were, What happened afterward made it undeniable Lynn's parents didn't just want me out of their daughter's life, they wanted to annihilate my entire future. You see, I had spent 3 years studying law preparing for the bar exam, the most important test of my life, the one that would determine my entire career. I didn't party, I didn't waste time. Every spare moment went into books and outlines. Lynn understood and supported me completely. But her parents, they saw it as the perfect chance to strike. The night before the exam, while I was reviewing one last time, they asked to borrow Lynn's laptop, saying they needed to print some documents. I didn't think twice. But later, when I checked my email, I discovered my exam registration account had been deleted. Just gone. I froze. 3 years of relentless preparation nearly erased with a single click. From the living room, I overheard them lounging on the sofa, whispering in Chinese with pure glee. If he fails the exam, Lin will definitely leave him. 3 years of effort, wasted done. Can you imagine someone devotes years of their life standing one step from success, and they deliberately sabotage it out of nothing but hatred for the color of my skin? That night, I didn't sleep. I called every emergency support line, begged, explained, pleaded. Finally, at 3 in the morning, I was granted a last-minute reactivation. 4 hours later, exhausted and barely standing, I walked into that exam room, and somehow I finished. As if that weren't enough, that same morning, Lynn received a message directly from her parents. We saw him at a bar all night. Probably didn't even take the test. A blatant lie designed to sow doubt, to make her believe I was lazy, dishonest, irresponsible. Thankfully, Lynn trusted me. But I understood something crystal clear: from now on, every achievement of mine would be a target. They wouldn't stop at trying to split us up. They wanted to strangle the very future I was building. What I felt then wasn't just anger anymore. It hardened into something colder, sharper, a calm resolve. I knew without a shred of doubt, when the time was right, I would give it all back to them, and I would do it to their faces at a moment when they would have no escape. Chapter 6. The Plot to Ruin the Wedding. When Lynn and I officially got engaged, I naively thought that after all those years of resistance, her parents would finally be forced to accept reality. But I was wrong. Instead of stopping, they pulled out a card more sinister than anything I had ever seen before. 1 week before the wedding, we had dinner with the family. While Lynn went to the restroom, I stayed behind with her parents. I watched as they raised their glasses, clinked them together, and whispered in Chinese, "We'll pay that girl 50 grand. On the wedding day, she'll storm into the ceremony crying and accusing him of rape. The entire family will be disgraced. In the end, Lynn will see the truth." I turned and looked directly at them, keeping my face composed, forcing a polite smile, as if I didn't understand a single word. Inside, though, my heart was pounding. Was this really how far they were willing to go? They didn't just want to break us apart, they wanted to drag my name through the mud in front of everyone on the most important day of our lives. Up to that point, they had already done everything: poisoned me with words, destroyed my phone, tried to drug my beer, even poured scalding soup over my back. And yet none of that was enough. They wanted Lynn's wedding day to turn into a grotesque theater of humiliation, a spectacle so shameful that neither of us could hold our heads high again. I sat there in silence, listening as they plotted every detail: how the girls' photos would be prepared, what kind of makeup would create fake bruises the exact moment she would burst in during the ceremony. They laughed, clinked glasses again, congratulating themselves on such a perfect plan. In that moment, I knew the time to flip the game was almost here. For 2 years, I had stayed quiet, endured, memorized every word, every scheme. And right there on the wedding day, I would make them face it all. They thought they were setting a trap for me, but in truth, they were walking straight into the trap I had been patiently building all along. Chapter 7. The Counterattack on the Wedding Day. The wedding day arrived. The banquet hall glowed with candlelight, laughter, and chatter filled the air, but inside me was a storm. I knew that somewhere the actress Lynn's parents had paid was waiting, ready to burst in and destroy everything. But I also knew one thing today. This stage belonged to me. Before the ceremony began, I stood up, champagne glass in hand, and tapped it lightly. The sharp chime cut through the noise, and the entire room fell silent. Every guest, every relative turned to look at me. Lynn stared in surprise while her parents looked slightly unsettled, unsure of what I was about to do. I took a deep breath and began speaking in Chinese. In that instant, I watched the blood drain from their faces. Lynn's mother's mouth dropped open, her eyes wide, as if she'd just seen a ghost. Her father froze in his seat, his face pale, his hands trembling so badly he dropped the napkin he was holding. I smiled faintly, then began my speech. Thank you, Mother and Father, for always showing me so much love and care these past 2 years. Thank you for giving me the chance to hear your most honest words, even when you believed I didn't understand. The hall erupted in stunned silence. I continued, still in Chinese, my eyes locked on theirs. I know everything. Every insult, every scheme, every plan. I heard it all, and I remember every detail. For 2 years I stayed quiet, not because I was ignorant, but because I was waiting for this day. The air in the room grew thick. Some of Lynn's relatives who also understood Chinese began whispering urgently, translating for those who didn't. Shock spread across the room like wildfire. I kept my smile steady, my voice. Even I especially want to thank Mother for being so careful with my phone, and Father for being so thoughtful in adding special seasoning to my beer. Guests began murmuring heads, turning suspicion and disgust building in their eyes. Lynn's parents muttered in panic, almost begging me to stop, but I pressed on. Today is supposed to be the happiest day of my life with Lynn, but since you prepared a special gift, I thought it only fair to return the favor. Then I looked around the room, my voice ringing clear. For 2 years, I've kept records of everything, every plot, every word. And today, in front of family and friends, I want to say just one thing. I am not afraid. I am not ashamed. The ones who should be ashamed are them. The hall erupted into gasps and whispers. Some relatives turned to Lynn's parents with open contempt. Lynn, trembling, gripped my hand tightly while her parents shook as though the ground beneath them was collapsing. In that moment, I knew the tide had turned. From the one they tried to humiliate, I had become the one holding all the power. And from that day forward, it would be them, their lies, their fear, their disgrace that haunted every step they took. Chapter 8. When the wicked are forced to kneel. Right after my speech, the entire hall buzzed with whispers. Guests murmured restlessly, and Lynn's relatives cast cold, cutting looks toward her parents. Lynn gripped my hand tightly, her eyes filled with questions she hadn't yet asked. But before she could say anything, her father suddenly stood up. His face was pale, sweat beading across his forehead. He walked over to me, grabbed my arm tightly, and muttered in a trembling voice, "Outside. Now." I let him drag me out to the back patio, away from curious eyes. Once the door closed, I noticed his hand was shaking violently, his fingernails digging into the sleeve of my suit jacket. The once arrogant man, the sharp-tongued schemer, now looked like someone cornered with no way out. He glanced around, making sure no one was within earshot, then whispered, "What do you want? Money? Do you want us to disappear? Just don't do anything more. Please." I stood still, watching him with calm, unblinking eyes. In my mind, every memory played back like a film reel. The slurs, the stiletto heel grinding into my foot, the beer laced with pills, the boiling soup searing my back. The hired actress meant to ruin my wedding. Every humiliation, every cruelty, every scheme. Finally, I answered softly, Do you think I endured 2 years of this just to beg for a few bills? I don't need your money. What I want is for you to live in fear. The same fear you tried to plant in me. Just then, a black SUV rolled slowly across the parking lot. Its tinted windows caught the sunlight, reflecting a cold metallic gleam. I glanced at it deliberately, then smiled. My father sends his congratulations. He values loyalty and punishes betrayal. I trust you understand what I mean. Lynn's father's face drained of the last bit of color, turning an ashen gray. His eyes locked on the SUV as it circled lazily, panic flooding his expression, his breath coming in short, sharp gasps. For the first time I saw him stripped of all arrogance, what was left was only raw, unfiltered fear. He whispered, his voice cracking, "Please, spare us. I promise we'll never interfere again. Just don't destroy us." I looked straight into his eyes, tilted my head slightly, and said quietly, "Sir, this began a long time ago. And you should know, it's only just beginning." With that, I left him standing there paralyzed in silence and walked back into the hall. At that moment, I knew the game had been completely overturned. The ones who had scorned me, who plotted endlessly in the shadows, were now nothing but trembling cowards begging for mercy in despair. Chapter 9. The banquet becomes a public trial. Walked back into the hall, leaving Lynn's father outside, trembling like a man who had just escaped a death sentence. The moment the doors swung open, every eye locked onto me. Some guests were still murmuring about my earlier speech. Those who understood Chinese were quietly retelling it to those who didn't. The once joyful atmosphere had shifted into something heavy and suffocating, like the room was about to witness a public trial. Lynn's mother hurried toward me, her face straining to hold onto a smile, while her hands shook uncontrollably, her fingers twitching. She lowered her voice, practically hissing through clenched teeth. "What do you want? Just say it. Stop dragging this out." I smiled deliberately, raising my voice so the entire hall could hear. "Mother, I only want to thank you for your thoughtfulness, from taking such good care of my phone to preparing special seasoning for my beer. Truly attentive." The hall fell dead silent. Then suddenly the whispers and horrified stares spread like wildfire. Some of Lynn's Chinese-speaking relatives exchanged furious looks, piecing everything together. Now the truth was undeniable. I reached for the microphone, my voice ringing steady and strong. For 2 years, I heard everything new, everything. They thought I was blind, clueless. But the truth is, I remembered every word, everything. And today, on my wedding day, I want everyone here to know exactly who tried to destroy this happiness. The room erupted. Guests turned, some glaring at Lynn's parents like they were strangers. Lynn stood frozen, her eyes brimming with tears as she turned toward her mother and father. Her mother stammered desperately, trying to defend herself. It was just a misunderstanding. Everything I did it to protect my daughter. But no one was convinced anymore. One of Lynn's aunts suddenly stood up, shouting in Chinese across the room. "And what about hiring someone to fake being a victim to ruin this wedding? You call that protecting your daughter too?" Every gaze shifted toward the once proud couple seated at the main table. Now they sat, shrunken, trembling faces twisted like criminals dragged into the light. I lowered the microphone, took Lynn's hand, and said softly but firmly, "I endured for 2 years, not because I was weak, but because I was waiting for this moment, to show you and everyone their true faces." Lynn shook, then broke down into tears. Around the hall, some guests were visibly moved, while her parents' faces drained of all color. In that moment, I knew their 2-year performance was over. But this was only the beginning of the reckoning they would have to face. Chapter 10. The True Day of Judgment. The wedding celebration should have been filled with laughter, clinking glasses, and joyful wishes. But after my speech, the atmosphere shifted completely. The hall no longer felt like a party. It felt like a courtroom. Guests whispered, relatives exchanged sharp glances, and every gaze turned toward Lynn's parents like invisible daggers. One of Lynn's uncles, normally a quiet, reserved man, suddenly stood up and declared, "I've suspected this for a long time. Now everything is clear. You two haven't just disgraced this family, you've shamed us all. Others nodded in agreement. Some couldn't hold back, dredging up old stories, how Lynn's parents had once tried to force a relative into marriage, how they always meddled in everyone's private affairs. The curtain of secrecy was ripped open, and every ugly truth about them was exposed before a room full of witnesses. I sat there holding Lynn's hand tightly. She was crying, but this time her tears weren't from pain or humiliation. These were the tears of someone who finally saw the raw truth she had long ignored. Lynn's mother trembled, her eyes darting wildly between me and her daughter, her lips stammering. I did everything, only to protect you. But her words were drowned in the rising tide of angry murmurs. Then Lynn's aunt slammed the table and shouted, "Protect her! And what about hiring a girl to pretend she was assaulted just to ruin this wedding? That's your idea of protection." The room erupted. Guests pulled out their phones, whispering as they replayed my earlier speech in Chinese. Within minutes, a few had already uploaded clips to social media. I knew what that meant. In just a few hours, the entire community would be buzzing with the truth. Lynn's father slumped into his chair, face ashen sweat pouring down like rain. He tried to speak, but all that came out were incoherent, broken murmurs. I rose to my feet, my voice calm, but carrying across the room. For 2 years, they treated me as less than human, believing they could destroy me with their schemes. But today, you all see the truth. The truth cannot be buried forever, and the truth itself is their sentence. A wave of applause broke out, not from everyone, but from enough people to leave Lynn's parents stunned. Dozens of eyes filled with contempt, disgust, and fury bore down on them. Lynn turned to me, whispering through her tears, "Thank you for letting me see it all." And in that moment, I knew our happiness had been defended, secured by the truth. As for her parents, the cruel architects of so many schemes, they had just stepped onto a path of disgrace and downfall from which there would be no escape. Chapter 11: The Price of Truth. On our wedding night, instead of being wrapped only in joy when Huinin and I lay together in the hotel room, still trembling from everything that had just unfolded, outside social media had already exploded. Guests had uploaded videos of my speech in Chinese, and the comments poured in by the thousands. Some were outraged, some were in disbelief, but the overwhelming majority condemned Lynn's parents. Lynn's phone buzzed nonstop. Friends, coworkers, even distant relatives in China called demanding to know if it was true. Lynn could only stay silent, clutching me tightly. Her eyes were red and swollen, but the blindfold that once covered them was gone. She had seen it all now. The next morning, as we finished breakfast, a friend sent Lynn a link. On WeChat, someone had leaked a recording of her parents' secret conversation, the one where they plotted to hire a woman to pose as a victim to destroy our wedding. A relative had caught it on their phone, and within hours it spread across the community like wildfire. As Lynn scrolled through the furious comments, her hands trembled. Her voice cracked when she whispered, "I never imagined my parents could sink this low." Meanwhile, her parents began to face the fallout almost immediately. Relatives cut ties, calling to say they wanted nothing more to do with them. The golf club, where her father loved to flaunt his status, announced a suspension of his membership to review ethical concerns. Her mother's book club struck her name off their list without hesitation. By noon, I received a message from one of Lynn's father's closest friends. Just one sentence: he's been summoned for an emergency meeting at work. I didn't need further details. I knew the first dominoes were already falling. Lynn sat by the window, staring blankly at the busy street below. Then she turned to me, her voice hoarse but steady. "They chose this path themselves. There's nothing left for me to hold on to." I pulled her into my arms and whispered, "We'll build a new family. A real one." And in that moment, I understood the spiral of truth had begun, and it would crush every false mask, every facade her parents had ever constructed. Chapter 12: Confronting the Evidence. A few days after the wedding, when the uproar still hadn't settled, Lynn sat across from me in our small apartment. Her eyes were steady, no longer clouded with doubt. She said firmly, "We can't let them keep pretending to be innocent. I want to hear them admit everything, every single thing, right in front of me." I nodded. I had been preparing for this day all along. For 2 years, I hadn't just listened silently. I had recorded every conversation, every scheme on my phone, and with tiny cameras. The hard drive in my hand was filled with undeniable proof evidence no one could twist or deny. We arranged to meet her parents in a discreet cafe. They arrived looking haggard, but still tried to hold on to their old arrogance. Lynn's mother spoke first. "If you still have any respect for blood ties, don't escalate this. We can settle things within the family." I opened my laptop and pressed play. Her voice rang out crisp and damning. "Pour the whole pot of boiling soup on his back. Our daughter will finally see his true face." Her mother's face drained of color. Lynn's father swallowed hard, stammering, "That was just a way of speaking. We didn't mean it literally." I said nothing. I simply clicked on the next file, a video showing him discreetly slipping something into a beer can, then leaning over to mutter in Chinese, "This sleeping pill will knock him out in 20 minutes. The cafe fell into absolute silence. The only sound was the damning playback striking like a hammer. Across the table, Lynn's hands trembled, but her eyes burned with fury. She turned to her parents and asked coldly, "And that was just a figure of speech, too?" They were speechless, their excuses caught in their throats. The moral masks they had worn for so long shattered completely under their daughter's gaze. I lowered my voice, calm but cutting. "You have two choices. One, admit everything, take responsibility, and begin real therapy to change. Two, I let this evidence spread even further, not just in your community, but to your workplace, your clubs, even your international circles." Lynn's mother let out a choking sob, her hands trembling violently. Her father looked away, sweat beading on his forehead. They knew I wasn't bluffing. The wedding clip had already proven I wasn't afraid to expose the truth. Lynn sat in silence for a long moment, then said firmly, "I don't need another fake apology. I need to see real change. If not, then you've lost me forever." The air was heavy, suffocating like a courtroom sentencing. For me, this wasn't just revenge. It was the moment Lynn finally reclaimed control over her life, breaking free from years of manipulation. And for her parents, it was the beginning of their collapse. No way back. No more masks. No escape. In the end, the truth came to light. They, the ones who mocked me, who tried to destroy me now, live under the contempt of their own community. Lynn, my wife, has seen it all clearly, and most importantly, we've escaped the toxic spiral they tried to trap us in. Perhaps justice doesn't always come from a courtroom. Sometimes justice is letting the wicked be burned by the light of truth itself, forcing everyone to see who they really are. And for me, love and patience triumphed over everything. This isn't just a story of revenge. It's a reminder no one can hide forever. Sooner or later, the truth will speak.